the fact that something that is equivalent to looking at a screen could actually do that to you.
I guess the question is, what's the threshold for regulatory intervention? If someone did this at the scale, let's say there was a social network that had 100,000 users, and people were actively using the social network every day and having body issues or whatever the consequences claim might be.
We're about to find out.
Are we going to end up creating kind of a regulatory framework across all of these things? And I think that this goes also to the point of scale, because at the end of the day, if you end up starting a business and you're not successful, you don't really kind of find yourself in the sort of framing of, well, what are you doing wrong? All of the companies that scale, the assumption is they did something wrong in order to get to that scale. Roll off both Sacks' former colleague and obviously famed investor now at Sequoia Capital, said that he only invests in businesses that pursue one of the 7 deadly sins, because those are ultimately the things that consumers kind of increment their consumption of. There has to be a 7 deadly sin driver, underscoring the success of any business that sells to consumers. And if that is actually true, people aren't making kind of altruistic purchasing and consumption decisions. They're making decisions based on envy and based on greed and based on gluttony, and all of those drivers we kind of, are effectively, Chamath, kind of related back to these physiological drivers, right? And so yeah.
No, 2 things can be right. What you said can be right, but I think what also can be right is, are we really willing to bet that now there are not 50 individually ambitious, politically ambitious state AGs licking their chops, reading this stuff, wondering how many kids in their state may have suffered from an eating disorder or anxiety and blame it on one of these apps?
Oh, of course
Are we convinced that not a single lawsuit will get filed? Are we convinced that there's not going to be any class action? And by the way, that's just the United States. What is somebody that's sitting around a table of politicians' desks in, Germany, Belgium, France, Thailand? They're going to find their issue in this treasure trove of content that's being, continuously drip fed out to the public.
I guess my point is that this is today's issue, and business success ultimately over time in consumer markets will always ultimately be driven by products that have at scale deleterious effects on the consumer market. And those deleterious effects will be a result of some sort of kind of addictive or negative kind of consequence that arises when folks use these things frequently. And the market figures out how to optimize the utilization of products to increase revenue, to increase profit. And that's what a free market does. And I'm not saying it's right or wrong. I'm just pointing out that there isn't, in my opinion, something unique here. I mean, Coca-Cola is the largest beverage company in the world. They sell 40 grams of sugar and 12 ounces of water. And everyone buys that and they feel great from that. And the sugar creates this addictive problem. Now we've got an obesity epidemic, and I'm not blaming Coca-Cola, but that's the general trend in CPG over the last 50 years, increasing sugar, increasing salt, and then health consequences arise.
The difference is that this is not sugar, which is a generic compound. This is, for example, no different than when Purdue Pharma started to make fentanyl. It's a really great drug. It has incredibly superior advantages. It's used for a lot of very important things. When that spilled over knowingly to a level of abuse, and I don't think it was a lot of abuse, but there was enough that essentially was overlooked in the building of a business. It started with state AGs who stepped in, and then it basically ultimately drove a federal agreement, states agreements, a master settlement agreement around fentanyl, and then Purdue essentially disgorging all the profits that they made. So you're right. Free markets should act in however way they're going to act. But when those free market operators themselves are producing data that shows that, oh shit, hold on, something could be going wrong here, then I do think that politicians will step in, regulators could step in. I mean, what's crazy here is, the FDA could actually act. Like if the FDA is willing to act on Juul, what is the difference if the FDA says they feel like, let's just assume that somebody in the FDA says, we feel like we should have a responsibility to think about mental health and eating disorders.
But that's the slippery slope, right? What's the threshold, right? At what point do they say, no, we're not touching this? And at what point do they say, yes, we are touching this? Because at the end of the day, any successful consumer product will have some degree of deleterious effect. Sacks,
and this is why we have to have some perspective about it. So in preparation for this segment, I asked my 11-year-old daughter, I know, Jake, how you don't think I talk to my kids, but actually...
I made no joke. No joke.
I was thinking of 3 or 4 funny things.
Did she ask you if you were the FedEx guy?
She was like, who are you? Why are you in my room? Security.
So the first thing she said is, who are you? And the second, and after I said, I'm your dad. And the second thing she said is, I don't use Instagram. I'm like, okay, well, what do you use? She said TikTok. I'm like, well,
the worst.
So I'm like, well, what do you use TikTok for? And she said, well, I watch dance videos. And I'm like, well, I've been reading press articles that say that the only thing on TikTok is sex and drugs, and that it's bringing you into a vortex of that. And she said, I don't watch that. I watch dance videos. And then smart as a whip, she said, the only people who end up watching that are the ones who keep indicating. She didn't use the word preference, but she basically said that they keep getting that stuff because they like it and they keep getting fed more of what they're watching. So look, I think we have to have a sense of perspective about this. At the end of the day, products like Facebook and Instagram are ways for people to share content and consume content from people they follow. I mean, that's basically it. Now, is there a lot of bad shit on there? Yeah, because there's a lot of bad shit in the world. And should Facebook be trying to control this stuff? Absolutely. But I don't, at the end of the day, think it's cigarettes.
If they banned kids from using TikTok and Instagram until they were 16 years old, would you be opposed to that? Because I don't let my kids use it, and I have an 11-year-old daughter. I wouldn't let her anywhere near.
We have a complete moratorium
TikTok.
on that.
No social media is our rule. I can't believe you let your kids use social media. I mean, I'm not passing judgment, but are you crazy?
I mean, like, all they use it for is to watch dance videos. So,
but I think Sacks' point is an interesting one, which is, based on what your daughter said, that is effectively what's going on. It creates an acceleration of the natural evolution of these markets that historically may have taken, call it 50 years for everyone to want to watch. MTV didn't emerge for 60 years until, there was kind of radio and television broadcast signals. And then everyone said, you know what, I want to watch rockers dancing on stage and going nuts. And whatever the kind of consumer demand was, it eventually evolved there. What's happening in social media is within seconds, you make evolutionary votes on kind of what you want in a media cycle. And then all of a sudden, a few hours later, you're getting exactly what you want over and over again. And you can't say no. And that's effectively what digital media generally, social media in particular has some nuances to it, but digital media generally has enabled is an acceleration of the natural consumption trend that we see with humans, which is they eventually want to go to one of the 7 deadly sins. And that's what they kind of get stuck with.
We've definitely talked about the danger of getting trapped in an information bubble and a feedback loop. And I do think that is a danger of these products, but so is cable news. I mean, you look at Twitter, it's an outrage machine, and people get trapped in a cycle, and they only want to, they either follow people to get outraged by them or just because they want to kind of self-indoctrinate themselves. But that is basically why people watch cable news as well. I mean, it is an outrage machine.
Your friend Tucker.
Or Rachel Maddow on MSNBC. They're both feeding different variations of outrage. And so my point is, look, I don't think these problems are unique to social media. I think they pervade Hollywood and the entertainment industry and even the news industry. Maybe we should put warning labels on them. At the end of the day, we don't prohibit cigarettes. We have an assumption of risk argument. We put warning labels on them. Maybe we need warning labels on these Instagram influencers.
You do more than that, right? You put it behind a counter, and there's a strict prohibition on people under the age of 18 being able to use them. And when it looks like, companies like Juul were trying to circumvent those things or make it appear more valuable, basically to hook kids at a younger and younger age when they weren't capable of making those decisions, they were held liable. So,
okay, so there's a really interesting topic there, which is, should people under the age of, say, 16 or 18 be prohibited from using these products?
Yes.
100%.
100%. Look, if you think about
16 or 18, 16 or 18.
Let's 16, 100%, 18.
16, 100%. And then there needs to be a way of opting out, because I think 16-year-olds are quite sophisticated. But here's the thing. We are living longer and longer than ever. It is very likely that we're all going to generally live to our hundreds. It's not the end of the world for these kids to have to wait an extra 2 or 3 years until their literal physiology is a little bit better formed so that they have better antibodies to this shit. And I think that if we as a adult population aren't necessarily going to take responsibility for these kids, I think we're doing them a huge disservice. You don't let your kids run around wherever they want. You don't let them hold guns whenever they want. You don't let them do a whole bunch of things that they may think is okay, but could have really bad consequences. And so if you know that this stuff is happening, I think it's very different to look at a 22-year-old and tell them what to do or not to do. That's not what we're debating. But what that data was about long-term systemic health issues to a large percentage of girls. That's really fucked up.
And a lot of the research that's come out, I dropped a couple of links in the chat. I haven't read the studies, but they're starting to show a correlation between suicide rates and depression in young kids with social media, and it does skew towards females. The theory is females are more adept or more frequently in dynamic or complex social situations. In other words, cyberbullying type situations where people use the social media to just kind of bully each other.
I mean, look, I think you guys have a real point with respect to ages 13 to 16. Because I don't think you're allowed to use social media, or at least the terms used prohibited under age 13.
We all know that's a joke. You and I have both had to build products that have to, abide by COPPA laws, and we always just kind of laugh at it because they're bullshit.
Right. Okay. Fair enough. But what I'm saying is, I think you guys have a real issue that needs to be explored around what's the usage for ages 13 to 16. But look, what I worry about with these things is you're always playing whack-a-mole, right? I mean, you basically ban social media, and all of a sudden these kids, because they're very tech savvy, are going to find themselves on text groups and text chats, and they'll be in Signal, and you won't even be able to see what they're doing. I mean, at least on social media, you can see it.
The whole point of that, though, that makes sense to me, because I remember when I was growing up and we all wanted to smoke, it was a pain in the ass to get cigarettes. So most of us just said, well, it's not worth it. But yeah, you're right. A handful of people found a way to get the cigarettes, to sneak behind the school, to smoke them. That's fine. But that's very different than Jewel walking into the middle of the lunchroom and passing out berry-flavored vape pens.
Yeah.
Do they do that?
Peanut. Wow.
That's what the FDA is saying.
Well, that's crazy. Obviously, that shouldn't be allowed.
They created packaging. If you look at the packaging,
why do you have the moral outrage around Juul and berry-flavored vaping and not this?
Why do you care about Juul, or why should we generally care about Juul and not care about soda companies making 40 grams per 12 ounces of sugar, which is truly dangerous and damaging to the health?
Because we've been drinking soda for a long time, and we've already accepted it.
So we've allowed ourselves to accept it. We smoked cigarettes for a long time, and then we had this kind of tobacco moratorium that's now kind of shut out smoking.
But Friedberg, if you said right now, COVID is a disease of the old and the obese, you would be canceled. Like, somebody tried to say that recently.
That's not my point, Jake.
But the point is, you're talking about, like, people are very sensitive about this obesity thing, and the second you say, like, we need to monitor it for you, they need to make
40% of Americans with type 2 diabetes, or whatever the stat is.
There's also personal freedom, and do you want to drink a Coke Zero or water or
and so
Coca-Cola?
If you have personal freedom, why should some regulator tell you what social media tool you should or shouldn't use?
We're not debating that.
How that right.
The cover up is what we're talking about.
If we're talking about minors, what are
you going to do with a 13 to 16-year-old? What are you going to do with the and Friedberg,
11-year-old?
That's the best part of your argument. That's the best part of your argument is when we're dealing with minors. I could see the argument for more restrictions and potentially support them depending on what they are. I think that's something. I think that's something that needs to be explored.
What about minors not being able to drink soda? You have to be 16-year-old to drink soda. I mean, that's where most diabetes and obesity is rooted in this country. Is I
children
actually am
soda.
Open-minded to that position. Actually, I know it sounds crazy, but
no, I think that makes an equal amount of sense. Kids drinking
Coca-Cola makes no sense if we have a crazy obesity. If we can actually show that.
So let's ask the question then. So let me ask a second order question about this, which is Friedberg is right that drinking sodas for 13-year-olds has got to be as harmful or more than using Facebook. Okay. So why do we never hear about that? I would argue that there's something else going on here with this massive amount of attacks on social networking companies. There's a lot of people who hate social networking in the traditional legacy media because they've been disrupted by Facebook, by these social media companies. And so they took their money. They took their money and they're looking to publicize any article about the negative effects of these companies, which they're not threatened by Coca-Cola. So they're not going to publish those kinds of studies. So I just think that there's an argument that perhaps, I'm not saying you're wrong. I think there's absolutely truth in what you're saying. It's all a matter of degree, though, and perspective. And I do think that the traditional media has an incentive to blow this out of proportion a little bit.
Because they have an agenda, is what you're saying.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think people in power, look, I think there's a positive thing about social networking. I mean, because we haven't said one positive thing about it, okay? Social networking overall, it enables us to stay in touch with people we care about, friends, family, and it allows us to receive information from people we want to follow. Okay. We never talk about those positives. I find it an incredibly convenient way to consume news. Okay. So we never talk about that. But here's why, is because social media is fundamentally a democratizing force. Right? It enables people to coordinate in a much more democratized way than they ever had been able to before. I do think that is threatening to people in power. And given the chance, they would like to suppress it. Zuckerberg gave a speech a few years ago about social networks being I think called the fourth estate, with the third estate being the press. And in the same way that there are people in power who want to censor the press, I do believe that there are people in power who want to censor social networks because they don't like the disruptive, democratizing force that it represents. And there is a lot of positive to that in the world.
I think you're mixing up a lot of things there. So yeah, you're right. And I don't think any of us are saying cancel these companies and remove them from the internet. I think what we're saying is there are very specific ways in which certain features are built, that they are expressed in features that are now apparently, according to their own work and exploration, are linked to mental health issues. So I think the point is people should now decide whether, to your point, we should ignore it because the good vastly outweighs, what's a third of girls? Who the fuck cares, right? I mean, they're chicks, so whatever. Or you say, actually, this is a really big problem, and so let's step up and fix it because somebody needs to protect these people. And when you're 16 or 17 or 18, do whatever you want, like we let people do today. You want to drink a Coca-Cola every day, get diabetes, you can do that. Nobody tries to stop you, right? You want to smoke a pack of smokes a day, you can do that. Nobody stops you. But we do a lot of other things to try to help kids.
I think if we're only talking about ages, if we're talking about the minors, the kids, I think you and I can find agreement on this issue. I think, but I do think that the demonization of social media goes well beyond that. But look, I think you've got a great point with respect to the kids.
Do you guys believe, and this is a theory that's been growing, that TikTok, run by the Chinese government, is trying to reprogram ethics, morals, and doing psyops, basically.
Wait, there's
psyops on our children.
No, Jay, there's something bigger than that. I mean, I think all of you guys probably upgraded to 14.8 iOS this week. I hope if you haven't, and everybody listening, if you haven't, please go upgrade it. But, the Israeli spy firm NSO had apparently created a zero-click exploit for the iPhone where you could turn on the camera and the microphone and basically spy on folks completely unaware. And, Jason and I were talking about this and I think, Jason, you were the one that said it. You're like, yeah, we've been living with that with TikTok for years. It's not as if, NSO just licensed it randomly to the Saudi government. I mean, this tool has been available for a while. So to your point.
But do we think that the Chinese government, TikTok, are trying to program our children to be more deviant and to create social unrest? And
no.
You don't think that they're trying to steer them with the algorithm towards bad results because they're not letting their kids play video games?
No, I think
if you look at that Wall Street, did you see the Wall Street Journal article that I just sent to you guys? Wall Street Journal article basically created a bunch of kids' accounts and then did searches or what started to go down a rabbit hole. And just with one keyword search, these kids went into deep, kink, BDSM results.
This is a pretty straightforward weighted tree algorithm. Okay, so when you start on a branch of a tree and you keep clicking on those things, that's what you will get. This is no different than how Facebook's algorithm works, how Google's search algorithm works for you. Once you start behaving with clicks or swipes or likes, they use that as a feedback loop and they basically weigh the next set of results. So David's daughter is right. If you click on sex, drugs, and rock and roll, it's not all you're going to get, but it's going to be a large percentage of what you get because the algorithm, in a blunt way, assumes that that's what you like.
Yeah.
So I'm not sure that this is repeating anything that's so, it's pretty obvious that that's how it should work if they want to have maximum utilization.
Well, the thing that's slightly different about TikTok is, in Facebook or Instagram, you build your feed and Twitter, and then it serves it up algorithmically. On TikTok, it uses the entire corpus. So if you do one search for a keyword, now it's not just a subset of what your friends posted in some ranked order. It's the entire corpus of long tail. And so what they show in this TikTok is how quickly a child who just types in one keyword can have their feed be 90% drug use and, sadomasochistic, whatever you're into, sex, I don't know. of crazy
Listen,
stuff.
if the content is obscene, then it should be taken down to begin with. Okay, and look, my takeaway from this conversation is that we need to do something different for kids. I don't know if it's a flat out prohibition or
That's what I agree with too.
but yeah, but look, so the TikTok algorithm thing, if you want to keep seeing more and more content related to something, fine. The algorithm is going to give you more and more of what you want as a consumer. But maybe for kids, there needs to be some guardrails around that. And we don't direct kids towards certain kinds of content around, sex or drugs or violence.
I have to constantly remind parents, like, YouTube, kids should not use YouTube because it goes really to crazy dark places.
Oof.
And there's kids YouTube. And kids YouTube, they add each and every video. Now, you'll still get some of that consumption and unboxing of things, and your kids will ask you to buy a bunch of stuff, but you're not going to get straight up sex, violence, and everything else that you'll find.
I'll tell you what does happen. I put kids YouTube on my 4-year-old's iPad, and then the other day she said she saw some like scary horror thing on there, and she couldn't sleep, and she woke up in the middle of the night because if we're not doing our job as parents, curating the content and curating what our kids are doing, and we're leaving it to this app, we're totally effed. And that's what I realized I did. My laziness in like just thinking like, oh, there was something she wanted to watch. So I put the app on there and didn't pay attention for a few weeks. And all of a sudden she had gone down the rabbit hole, found something scary. It scared her.
I don't know if you guys use this, but I use an app called Custodio. It's with a Q, Custudio. And you can kind of like lock down all these devices. And then at the end of every week, it gives you an email of all the app usage and all the links that my kids clicked on, or just my oldest one. He's the only one that has a phone. But
that's nice. And you had a discussion with them about that, like, hey,
and
it's
the
a privilege
rules
to have
and
this, and it's
going
to tell me what you do.
But I agree, it's still super, super hard. But this is why I think you need to have some blunt force instruments right now. And my blunt force instruments are: you're not allowed to have, the ones that they're not allowed to have TikTok, Snapchat, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter.
Yeah, it's hard now.
And the only reason we allow YouTube is because a lot of the school links are to videos inside of YouTube. And so you can't lock it down. But that's why I use this Custodio app to see what they're watching on YouTube. Even then, though, it's not perfect.